There are some incredible monster movies that everybody will recognize, such as Alien, Predator, The Thing, and Frankenstein. And yet there are plenty of shudder-inducing features involving aliens, zombies, or even alien zombies that remain mostly forgotten, despite boasting astounding visuals, nightmarish gore, and scares that are bound to last a lifetime. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 perfect monster horror movies you've never heard of. Number 10. Cub. Heading into the woods as a child can be a terrifying experience, especially for 12-year-old Cub Scout Sam, who's routinely bullied by his troop. And just when Sam thought his anxiety couldn't get worse, the group gets lost in the mountains. To top it all off, Sam encounters a monstrous being called Kai while making his way through the wilderness. Although the others dismiss Sam's claims, they change their tune when bodies begin dropping like flies. Cub has a hefty amount of cliches and stereotypical characters, but it doesn't feel trite, since the Flemish indie deliberately harkens back to 80s classics like Friday the 13th. Speaking of which, Cub plays out more like a slasher than a creature feature, since the antagonist executes its prey with brutal efficiency. Also, anyone who thought the kills would be tame because of the young cast will be in for a rude awakening. There's so much derivative schlock out there, it's refreshing to see a horror movie that's not afraid to get really nasty. Having said that, animal lovers may want to skip the dog piñata sequence entirely. Number 9. Late Phases. Late Phases, also known as Night of the Wolf, follows Ambrose, a blind veteran forced to move into a retirement home. Just when he feels like his life couldn't get more depressing, Ambrose discovers the residents are being picked off by a werewolf. Thanks to the shoestring budget, the shape-shifting creatures don't get much screen time, but when a werewolf does rear its ugly mug, it makes every second count. It also gets major props for refusing to indulge in CGI. Instead, the filmmakers hired From Dusk Till Dawn's makeup artist Robert Kurtzman to devise the visuals. Even though Late Phases gets pretty zany, Ambrose anchors the story, keeping everything firmly rooted in reality. Despite the fact he's a grouch, he comes across as sympathetic since he's trying to better himself, despite his cantankerous nature. And when Ambrose starts to take charge of the retirement home, the feeble old man turns into an absolute badass. Number 8. Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. There have been plenty of horror anthology series over the years. However, one spooky show that slipped between the cracks is Tales from the Dark Side. Casual horror fans are likely unfamiliar with the 1983 TV Spookfest, which means even less people will be familiar with the film adaptation. That's a shame, since Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, perfectly meshes all sorts of monster folklore, including witches, ghouls, mummies, gargoyles, and evil cats. That last part may sound silly, but it's probably the creepiest segment. Although the special effects are phenomenal and the acting is great, it's the writing that makes every scene enthralling. The screenplay was written by Mad Max's George Miller and Beetlejuice's Michael McDowell, who really know how to tell a story with innovative visuals. All in all, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, should captivate horror lovers, even if they aren't familiar with the original series. Number 7. Waxwork. Anthony Hickox's directorial debut centers around a horror-themed wax museum that's renowned for containing the 18 most evil beings. Thinking it'll be a laugh, university student Mark and his friends agree to the tour. But as Mark and his buddies make their way through the building, they're transported to pocket dimensions where the monstrous mannequins spring to life. Worst of all, anyone who's slain by these creatures will join the display forever. The horror comedy goes all out with its premise, paying homage to many iconic monsters. It's obvious the filmmakers have a ball during production, inserting all sorts of subtle Easter eggs. Purists will appreciate seeing Jason Voorhees actor Kane Hodder portraying Frankenstein's monster. It's also a nice touch how each pocket dimension makes a nod to a different aspect of horror. For example, in Dracula's reality, everything is styled like a Hammer production, and the zombie realm is in black and white, harkening back to George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Waxwork really is a must-watch for any horror advocate. Number 6. Grabbers. Sci-fi horror Grabbers opens with a horde of hostile aliens invading an island off the coast of Ireland. Due to the creature's strength, speed, and resilience, it looks like all hope is lost. When it's discovered the space squids have an aversion to alcohol, though, the inhabitants get plastered to stay alive. What makes Grabbers work is that it knows when to take itself seriously and when to have a laugh. Although the premise is silly, the aliens are freaking terrifying. The whip-tongued bloodsuckers attack with such unhinged ferocity, it's easy to forget Grabbers is a comedy. Some jokes have been done to death, but Grabbers gets away with it by putting a creative spin on them. Of course, none of this would matter if the characters weren't compelling. And and fortunately the ensemble is endlessly entertaining, led by Richard Coyle and Ruth Bradley. The pair have such solid chemistry, it's no surprise to learn that the actors actually started dating during the filming. Even though the whole scenario sounds absurd, every scene is rife with tension. Considering the premise boils down to drunks versus aliens, it's incredible Grabbers turned out so well. Number 5. Silver Bullet. While discussing monsters on the big screen, it's only a matter of time before Stephen King gets brought up. Silver Bullet, based on the horror maestro's novel of the same name, centers around paralyzed boy Marty, who deduces the recent killings in the town were caused by a werewolf. Even though the source material plays it straight, the movie adaptation ramps the campiness up to 11. After seeing Marty riding around in a motorcycle-tailored wheelchair, it's easy to understand why critic Roger Ebert genuinely believed this so-called horror was a parody. But that doesn't change the fact that Silver Bullet is a blast, perfectly blending multiple genres, including body horror, whodunit, psychological thriller, and borderline slapstick comedy. Though the tongue-in-cheek approach could hinder the scares, the juxtaposition works great, especially when an unnerving sequence follows a moment of levity. Silver Bullet isn't among King's best monster flicks, but it deserves a lot more appreciation than it got. Number 4. The Wretched. On paper, The Wretched sounds like a witch version of Fright Night, with teenager Ben learning his neighbor is secretly a child-eating sorceress. But that's where the similarities end. Able to absorb the skins of humans and animals, the witch can take the form of any person or creature. As a result, Ben becomes wary of every person or animal he encounters, no matter how innocent they seem. The idea that the witch can look like anything is a great way for the film to maintain a permanent sense of tension, since it's never clear when the characters are in danger until it's too late. As hard as it is to believe, that's not the worst part, as after the skinwalker devours her prey, she erases the memories of the family and friends so they don't remember the victim existed. Also, The Wretched has to be commended for its visuals. The way the witch crawls out of her human skin looks so convincing, it's hard to believe the budget was $66,000. Not only is The Wretched underrated, it has one of the most unappreciated horror monsters of the last decade. Number 3. Demons. This Italian supernatural flick kicks things off with a group of college students being invited to an old theater to watch a free horror movie. Unfortunately, elements of the spooky feature bleed into reality, transforming several cinema goers into flesh-craving monsters. Much like the title, Demons is very blunt and direct. There's no epic backstory or plot twist, it's just humans fighting demons for 90 minutes in a cinema. Despite the straightforward approach, the film is utterly captivating. Since the story mostly takes place in the same building, there's a permanent sense of claustrophobia, and once the demonic threat is let loose, the scares never let up. Also, the eerie musical score keeps the tension elevated, even when the titular beasties aren't on screen. Sure, the characters are a little one-note, but that doesn't matter too much since the actors totally sell how much danger they're in. With Demons about to hit its 40-year anniversary, it's high time the masses gave this gem more attention. Number 2. His House. Netflix exclusive His House opens with Sudanese refugees Bol and Rial escaping from their war-ravaged home and setting in an English town. Despite being assigned to a crumbling house and dealing with thinly veiled racism on a daily basis, the pair hope to rebuild their lives. But when they discover a malevolent spirit called Apeth in their new home, they realize their troubles are far from over. His House doesn't feel like a standard horror film at first, with the leads dealing with oppression, trauma, prejudice, and the risk of deportation. In fact, it's easy to forget this is a ghost story. Speaking of which, the Apeth is a real piece of work. Rather than tossing tables or telling the occupants to leave, the Spectre forces them to relive the atrocities of their homeland. The Apeth attempts to break Bol and Rial's minds, making them believe they can never escape their past. His House does such a fine job highlighting the couple's real-life struggles, they're more disturbing than the Apeth itself. After learning what the main characters had to do to survive back home, living in a haunted house doesn't sound too bad. Number 1. Tumbad. This Hindi horror follows Vinayak, whose village has been cursed after the locals worshipped a greedy deity. Hoping to bring peace to his home, he sets out on a journey to appease the gods. Although it sounds like Tumbad may be an acquired taste, it has something to offer everybody. The first chapter plays out like a fable, brimming with nerve-jangling jump scares and superb practical effects. The second chapter delves into cosmic horror, which is sure to be a real treat for Lovecraft fans. And without spoiling anything, the final chapter is well, it's really messed up. Whether viewers are into blood-soaked violence, body horror, or a psychological thriller, rest assured that this folktale has all bases covered. Due to its imaginative action, layered story, powerful performances, and impeccable genre bending, it's a mystery why Tumbad remains under the radar.